Hi there, my name is Philip Eidson. I want to welcome you to the Art of Procurement podcast, the podcast that helps you, a forward-thinking procurement professional, position yourself and your team to proactively take advantage of the revolution that's taking place in procurement today. By interviewing industry trailblazers and sharing insights from our own experiences, my team and I pull back the curtain and shine a light on the strategies, tactics, and tools that procurement teams are using to elevate their impact.
In today's episode, we'll conclude the presidential elections special series by comparing the policy positions of the two major party candidates. Now, the goal of this series from the outset was to examine the facts using information from primary sources only about each candidate on policies that are relevant to procurement and supply chain professionals. So we looked at big picture areas like supply chain, trade and tariffs, China, energy, and emissions and the environment. And then I added on details and statements made by each candidate about price or rate fixing and the proposed changes to the corporate tax rate. Now, just an observation as I start to round this series down. From an information and research standpoint, it was much easier gathering primary source data about Kamala Harris because there were simply less interviews. I was able to review, either watching or reading the transcript, nearly all of them. With Donald Trump, the information from him, from his campaign, and about him was overwhelming. And so it was interesting that in that abundance of information, boiling it down to primary source data was a real challenge. I'm still not sure, as I commented in part 2 of this series, about the extent to which Kamala Harris's new way forward and the Democratic Party platform coexist or work together, compared to the singular Make America Great Again platform shared by both the Trump campaign and GOP. Let's start in this episode, as we have in the last two, with supply chains. Kamala Harris's approach to supply chains is dominated by her focus on critical industries and sources of supply. So think semiconductors, automotive manufacturing, and food production. Now, I do question what focusing on supporting smaller food producers would do in terms of supply surety and food costs. But if it does work, I would like to see it applied in areas like baby formula, where we have seen as a supply chain community what happens when you have too much market concentration among too few players. Trump's approach to supply chain is more focused on reshoring and preventing companies, regardless of industry, from moving their operations outside of the United States. As I commented in part 3, I appreciated his recognition that made in the USA may mean more than one thing in practice, and that we need to be able to tell the difference. That recognition and any rules, incentives, or regulations that follow from it will ultimately determine how many jobs and how many supply chains remain or become domestic. Regardless of who wins in November, it will be interesting to see if they keep the White House Council on Supply Chain Resilience. It'll also be interesting to see if they change the composition of the council. Currently it's the president's cabinet minus the education secretary. Will the vice president be added to the council? Will the mission be changed or clarified? Will there be additional private sector participation? That is something in either case that we will have to wait to see. Now, when we drill down and start thinking about trade and tariffs, this is the first of two policy imbalance areas that I found in going through this series. I felt that there was a real shortage of specifics from the Harris campaign based on what I was able to find. In fact, there was hardly a mention of tariffs beyond using the word to criticize Trump's plans. But this is an area where Trump not only has a very defined policy, he is exceptionally sure about it. Tariffs for everyone other than the United States is the simple answer. High tariffs where they are needed, especially where there is an imbalance in trade, would be brought to bear. The concern about this approach, of course, is that high tariffs will make costs go up, even if they do save American jobs in the short term. And Trump has regularly been challenged about this effect, and he is absolutely certain that the benefits will outweigh the shortcomings. Now, indirectly, but definitely related to trade, was the decision made by the Teamsters labor union not to make a presidential endorsement this year. This is happening for the first time since 1996. President Sean O'Brien spoke at the Republican National Convention, but not at the Democratic National Convention. Despite both candidates being vocally supportive of the unions and actively courting their endorsement, the Teamsters did not make one. They differ in this from some of the other major labor unions. In terms of polls of their members taken after Joe Biden exited from the race, Donald Trump received first 60 and then 58% of Teamster vote, compared to first 34 and then 31 for Kamala Harris. Moving to China, I am glad to see both candidates speak candidly and strongly about the threat they pose, not just to business, of course, but to the world. Kamala Harris is focused on labor rights, as well as intellectual property protections, and the race to dominate AI. Trump is more specific about what he would do than Harris when it comes to China, outlining plans to revoke China's most favored nation status and limit their ability to invest and buy property and companies in the United States. Even though Trump does not speak as often about clean energy and the environment, he did express concern about the fact that all of the EVs might end up being made in China because of the cost advantage they hold, unless, of course, a tariff is put in place. Now, let's think about energy. This is an area where what the candidates are proposing is very different. Kamala Harris is dedicated to the clean energy transition, while Trump declares his plan to, quote, drill, baby, drill. And while Harris is focused on renewables, Trump speaks frequently about the cost of energy by type, something that all companies and industries, as well as consumers, should be concerned about. Interestingly, both talk about wanting the United States to become a net energy exporter, understanding the potential power and profit, of course, associated with being able to fulfill this role in the world supply chain. From energy, we turned to emissions and the environment. This is the other major policy area where I feel we have an information imbalance. In line with her energy policy, Kamala Harris's platform has extensive information about climate action, clean energy, and clean production in different industries and types of manufacturing. What we don't yet know is how much regulation would accompany such a push, and how would it work in practice. Those are things for everyone to be on the lookout for. But Donald Trump, we have a lot less information from him, from his campaign, from the official party platform on this topic, especially when you get specific around emissions. Ironically, the one specific statement I found was about the nuclear plant Trump helped finance in Georgia. That may end up being the closest to what happens regardless of who is elected, simply because AI requires so much energy that as a country, we're going to have to evaluate how we feel about bringing nuclear plants back online. On price fixing, whether it is through a federal ban on price gouging proposed by Kamala Harris, or a limit on the interest rates credit card companies are legally allowed to charge, thanks to Donald Trump, The power of the pen could create real challenge for businesses here, even if it's in the name of protecting consumers. And so again, regardless of which candidate becomes president in January, any policy they have where the federal government adds new rules that apply to private business is something all of us are going to have to keep an eye open for. And last but not least, corporate taxes. Kamala Harris would raise corporate taxes from 21% to 28%. Donald Trump has said he will reduce corporate taxes from 21% to 15%. If we take a corporate perspective on this, and since we're covering these candidates from our perspective as supply management professionals and not as voters, lower taxes allow companies to make more of their own decisions about how to spend, invest, and grow with the revenue and profits they generate. But if we do get higher taxes, it may elevate the role of procurement because companies will need to do more or the same with less available capital. As of October 17th, these two candidates are locked in a tight race. Either one could pull out a win, and there are still enough days in October for us to have a surprise or two. We may also not know right away who has come out on top. For the sake of argument, let's assume we have about 60 days before a new president takes office. Knowing in advance which policies, supply chain, trade, tariffs, China, energy, and the environment will affect your company the most and affect your suppliers the most, gives you the time to put new plans and strategies in place. This series has been quite a challenge and quite a journey, but it doesn't have to end here. At this point, I'm just a few days out from part 1 publishing so that everyone can listen. And I am quite sure there's been active debate on social media about these episodes. I do welcome you to join the conversation. Please remember those Roadhouse rules we talked about in part 1. But also, don't let your journey with my content end here. If you listened to this presidential election special series on Art of Procurement, please do a quick search for Art of Supply right in that same podcast platform and subscribe when you see that bright orange square. You can also follow Art of Supply on LinkedIn or reach out and connect with me directly. We release a new episode of Art of Supply as well as the LinkedIn Art of Supply newsletter on the same topic every Thursday. Thank you so much for listening, for commenting, for giving all of this thought, and please, don't forget to vote.
If this episode struck a chord with you, please do send it to somebody. We grow here at Art of Procurement through word of mouth, and that would be really appreciated. You can also support us by giving us a thumbs up, a star rating, or a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Since 2015, we've built the world's largest free resource for procurement professionals looking to elevate their impact. Our resources span podcasts like this, videos, blog posts, papers, and events. To join us on the inside and to ensure you never miss an episode, a webinar, event, or a post, please do subscribe to our weekly newsletter, This Week in Procurement. You can do that at artofprocurement.com/subscribe. That's artofprocurement.com/subscribe. Thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.